All good to go.
Great. Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. Today, we're going to be focusing on highly sensitive people. And this is a particularly poignant issue because with all the chaos and turbulence and conflict in the world today, highly sensitive people tend to be more aware, more reactive, but also more creative in their responses if it's properly choreographed from their inner place of being. But before we dive into that subject, I want to just bring an update of events that we've been tracking over the last several months having to do with the protests in China. They now are saying that the student protests in China are the largest since 1989, when you'll recall there was the big massacre at Tiananmen Square in the heart of Beijing, and hundreds of people were killed, thousands were arrested, and the Communist Party in that country consolidated control until the present day. But reacting to the strictures around COVID, people have been coming out into the streets. And what I observed yesterday on Humanity Rising, I wanted to just reiterate today because I think it's very important as we witness world events to understand connections. That the events in Iran, starting on September 16th, when the young girl, Mahsa Amini, was beaten to death by the morality police there of the regime, one of the most coercive regimes in the entire world, because she didn't have her hijab on right, her headdress that they insist that every woman wear. The revolution in 1979 was really built around the cornerstone, according to the Ayatollah Khomeini, on making sure that they controlled the women, and that the way to control the women was to force them to wear the hijab. So that's been at the heart of the Iranian regime, and it's what the young women were taking on, and that started a firestorm of protests, the largest protests in Iran since the 1979 revolution, and now it's spread to China. And again, you have young people, teenagers, in this case, both boys and girls, young men and young women, and you'll probably have noticed in some of the reports that they're holding up a blank sheet of paper. Well, that started in Hong Kong a number of years ago when they began to protest increasing authoritarian controls, as a way to say that we're dissenting, but we're not going to do anything. We're not going to write anything down. We're just going to hold up a blank sheet of paper. And we want the authorities to know that we don't agree with what's going on. We want basic freedoms. We want the right to be who we are. We want the right to express what we feel. And that's what's been going on in Iran. It's not an ideological revolution as such, as either a Marxist or, fascist, as you typically think of revolutions 100 years ago. But this is what is being termed a humanistic revolution. They're just demanding the right to be themselves. And this is now gaining momentum in China. And it is my hope that this will spread around the world. These are clearly highly sensitive individuals. And to give you a measure of what this means, I want to draw your attention to the match today at the World Cup between the United States and Iran. Many of us are just going to watch the World Cup because we enjoy football, or soccer as it's called in the United States. But it's worth just noting that the Iranian team in their first game last week all the young men refused to sing the national anthem. The authorities back in Iran went to their families and said, you need to communicate to your sons, because if they don't sing the national anthem, we're going to torture and kill you, the family. And they said the same thing to the team at the World Cup. So just imagine being 17, 18 years old, 20, 22 years old, wanting just the freedom to express yourself and being told if you do so, particularly the World Cup before billions of people watching, we're going to torture and kill you and your family when you get back. So if you're a highly sensitive person taking this in, it's going to jolt your system more than the ordinary person. And that's what we're going to be discussing today. But I want to bring in what's happening in China, what's happening in Iran, because these are young people. These are young people that are igniting a revolutionary movement for the sake of just humanity itself. What greater courage, what greater truth can we uphold and take a stand around than simply the right in an increasingly totalitarian world to just be human? That's most essentially who and what we are. That's at the heart of Humanity Rising. That's what we broadcast day in and day out, is what it means to be human and the multifariousness, multidimensionality of our species. Before we dive into our program, let us pause and just take all this in, and let us breathe together as we always do on Humanity Rising in the midst of all the tumult and chaos and craziness and violence in our world. Just breathing together is important. So in a moment, Georg is going to put up an art card, and you'll hear the sound of a bell. When you hear that bell, just breathe in very slowly for about 5.5 seconds. You'll hear another bell, and just exhale for 5.5 seconds. We're going to do it for 10 breaths. If you do that over a minute, you'll bring in 5.5 liters of air, and you will have breathed 5.5 times. So we're going to do it for 10 breaths. And just relax into the oneness of our humanity. Thank you, everyone. Georg. Thank you, everyone. It's always good to bring ourselves into harmony by just our breath. In the spirit of Plotinus, who said that the whole universe breathes together as one. It's my pleasure now to introduce someone that I've recently met, Elaine Freund, who was there in France with our pilgrimage in August. And I got to know her then and discovered that she's this extraordinary woman who has a specialty in both identifying and really speaking to highly sensitive people. I didn't know it, but about 20% of us happen to be highly sensitive. And that carries some issues, it carries some dangers, but also some opportunities. So I've invited Elaine, who's a family therapist and counselor, who's an international consultant on high sensitivity, to speak with us today, because I have a feeling that we have a higher percentage than most in our global humanity rising community, wherever you are in the world, that is highly sensitive. So Elaine, thank you so much for offering to be with us today. And I turn the program over to you. And for those of you who are joining the chat for the first time, any questions you have or comments that you want to make, just write them down in the chat, and we'll bring them in after Elaine has finished her presentation. But Elaine, welcome.
Thank you so much, Jim. I'm really honored to be here, and I agree. I think I talked to you in France and said, I just really think that the vast majority of people you're reaching have this trait of high sensitivity. I know I do. And thank you for your opening comments. I was tearing up and feeling that tightness in my chest as you were talking about those things. I could cry right now. That's one of the trademarks of highly sensitive people, is that we really, really feel things deeply. And so my intention today is that I'm going to give you some facts. I'm going to try to convince you that this is a real thing, and that you at least know someone who's highly sensitive if you aren't yourself. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and my own experience, and then I'm going to tell you what highly sensitive people need to thrive. And the topic for this presentation, caring for sensitive brains in the midst of a suffering world, came from a question that a Humanity Rising member asked me to address. So it's my mission in the world to reach almost 2 billion highly sensitive people in the world. And I think this is a great step along that mission. So I appreciate the opportunity. I want to start today by reading something to you that I wrote during the pandemic. And I want you to keep doing the breathing. This breathing in through your nose and out through your nose for 5.5 seconds is life-changing. And Jim taught it to us all in the Chart community, and I've been practicing it many times a day. It's sort of my mindfulness activity. And this is a moment of pain for me that this little essay I'm going to read to you. So it might bring pain to you to remember this. And I encourage you to keep breathing and maybe close your eyes as you're listening. I sit in front of my TV weeping. I've been on a news fast to take a break from the COVID pandemic drama and trauma. My tender, highly sensitive heart is exhausted and burned out. Last week on a Wednesday evening, I was part of an online webinar on well-being and self-care, including working with breath. The 4 panelists on the screen were white. No one mentioned breath in the context of our recent martyr. I am a privileged white woman living in a rural area in California. My privilege included a news fast because my empathy as a highly sensitive person has worn me down. All the time on screens had worn me out. Worrying about the world's citizens and opening back up had been exhausting me. And then I took a few days off from working and turned on the TV to see a video of a white cop on top of a black man who was crying out for his mama and saying he can't breathe. I find myself struggling to breathe through the pain I can see and feel in this country, in this world, and yet I can breathe. The tremendous grief that has erupted on the behalf of George Floyd and Black Americans across the world who truly can't breathe. thousands of world citizens dead from COVID-19, public servants putting themselves in harm's way to serve our country and the world and to care for the ill. And now it feels like we have a breaking point. But while trying to have a vacation today, I turned on Rick Steves, the HSP's friend on public broadcast television, to see his travels in Europe. Always an HSP-friendly afternoon of TV. And what should I see but his expose on severe hunger and extreme poverty across the world, focusing on Guatemala and Ethiopia, and how climate change has extended the hungry season of drought and famine. How do we manage our deep, profound empathy? We tend to keep our hearts soft and open to the world, and thus we feel the pain, the fear, the hardship, and anger so poignantly. I can feel your pain, my dear ones, my siblings, parents, and children of the world. I ache on your behalf, and I wonder how, once again, I can turn my metta or loving kindness meditation out to you, to the families who hurt in so many ways, while also turning it toward myself. Do I have any energy, any empathy left for my own tender heart? I had better practice what I preach, because I can only pray, meditate, heal, hear, and love you if I first do these things for me. I have to put my oxygen mask on first, something that the airlines got right. And so, once again, I'm going to offer to you Eve Decker's loving kindness meditation, which has become mine with her blessing. And I offer it out to you and to the world. Thank you, Mr. Floyd, for giving your life in the service of world peace. I know you did not choose to go, and I'm sorry you were so afraid. May your spirit soar high and free. I will always remember you and the flame you ignited with deep gratitude. Eve Decker's loving kindness chant is called May We, and my assistant will put it in the chat for those of you who are live, and we'll put it in the comments as well. But you can look it up on the internet. She wrote this from her work at Spirit Rock, which is a meditation center in my community. May we be safe and protected from inner and outer harm. May we be truly happy and deeply peaceful. May we be healthy and strong and physically at ease. May we take care of ourselves and live with well-being. So thank you for listening. I thought that telling you how I was thinking and feeling at that moment in time might be a really good explanation of what it means to live with a highly sensitive brain. It's a challenging time. And I do want to say that I got a lot of backlash for that blog because it was called I Can't Breathe. And as a white woman, many white liberals slapped me down to tell me that I had no right to use those words. And, even that, brought tears to my eyes. So we can be impacted by so many things, but our big open hearts are what change the world and what makes the world better. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to shift us now into a little bit of a didactic presentation, but I want to really encourage you and ask you to please, please, please put your questions and comments in the chat if you're here live. And Jim will be monitoring them, and we will definitely have a dialogue. I'll pause a couple times in this presentation to see how things are going. Are you highly sensitive? Caring for sensitive brains in the midst of a suffering world. I also wrote a blog where I said, I can't remember a time when the world wasn't suffering. And perhaps this is the state in which we live our lives. I did want to show you my office during the pandemic, and to this day, through the pandemic taught me highly sensitive people love nature, and to be outside, it's much more soothing and less overstimulating, right? And so this is my horse corral. I practice equine assisted growth and learning, equine assisted psychotherapy. And I moved my office outside, and I decided that I really never need to sit inside and talk to clients again. Of course, I have done a lot of sessions on video. These are some of my equine colleagues after a session. The client was in that chair working on her dental phobia. We reclined her all the way down, and the horses all came around and helped her. This is another session with two more of my equine colleagues. That's me sitting up on the hillside. And this is I put this in to tell you that my great passion in this work is the youth. And these are both teenagers who've worked in my sensitive youth program, getting hugs from horses. And it's such a blessing to get to see youth flourish this way. And the youth are so important because I don't know about you, but I grew up being told I was just too damn sensitive. And you know what? I am too damn sensitive for this world, but it's not me who's wrong. And I'll show you why. The trait has a scientific name. It's called sensory processing sensitivity. A trait is, you can see what it is. It's a habitual pattern of behavior, and it's innate. You're born with it. I get questions all the time from highly sensitive people. Please tell me how to be less sensitive. Please tell me how to heal this. There's nothing wrong with you. You cannot change it. You will be highly sensitive. You have been since the day you were born, probably in utero, and you will be for the rest of your life. So listen up and let me convince you. We are a minority, and the numbers change all the time. You'll see stuff on the internet saying we're 15%, we're 20%, we're 30%. The important point is that probably on average, highly sensitive people are about 20%. There are so many different ways to be highly sensitive that if we include every way that a person's highly sensitive, particularly sensitivity to your environment, it might be as many as 30%, some studies are showing. Now, this is way too large a group to be a disorder or an illness. It is way too prevalent, and yet it is a minority. And what that means is most of us live in cultures that are designed by and for the majority. And that's what makes the world seem wrong. So here are some names. I already said high sensory processing sensitivity is the name of the trait. It means that your brain literally functions differently, as shown on thousands of functional MRI studies. The term coined by Elaine Aron in 1995 is highly sensitive people. That's the title of the book that you should purchase today and read if you want to find out more about this. And in some science, and particularly coming out of Sweden, the words orchids and dandelions are used. Orchids being the highly sensitive people. Dandelions, they can grow anywhere. And the number of seeds they produce and the ease of propagation is so phenomenal. Well, we need thousands of dandelions. We need them because if we were all orchids, there just wouldn't be enough special care in the world for us. Orchids, I'm an orchid, but we are defined by variety. Sometimes you might look at a beautiful, unique flower and have no idea what it is. Chances are excellent that it's an orchid. And sensitive people are also defined by variety and diversity. We are sensitive in thousands of different ways, and we are thousands of different kinds of people. In fact, I like to say there are as many ways to be highly sensitive as there are highly sensitive people in the world. 20 to 30% of the world's population. It's a lot of different ways. Now, sometimes we ask the question, are we an introvert or an extrovert? And this is I'm trying to make it so you can see the title. This is a video. I have a YouTube channel, so please come subscribe to me so you see my content. Lots of sweet short videos there and lots of good advice. And this video is called Elaine Friend, Introvert YouTuber. I'm an introvert. And most highly sensitive people actually are introverts, but not all of us. And this is the thing. And this is one of the points of confusion for highly sensitive people in the world, and the world thinking and learning about high sensitivity is it seems it's easier to think that an introvert, somebody who thrives more on alone time and not being out in the world, would be highly sensitive. Who would ever think that an extrovert would be highly sensitive? But in fact, 30% of highly sensitive people are extroverted. And that's a really important thing. So when I define this for you in a moment, just because you or that person who seems to fit the parameters is more extroverted and more out in the world does not mean that they're not highly sensitive. And I used to travel and teach in-person retreats and do live workshops all the time to teach about high sensitivity and to fulfill my mission. And when the pandemic came, oh my gosh, how am I going to reach the world? So I just bucked it up and got on video. And now I don't even see myself, which is a great blessing, let me tell you, because it's hard for an introverted HSP to be on screen. see here. I've lost my ability to advance. There we go. Okay, so this is an important piece. I was talking about how we're a minority. It's always a minority. And the reason is there would be no advantage if everyone was highly sensitive. And the research, well, I'm just citing a few simple studies, particularly early ones. There have been hundreds of studies after this that have validated the research. I'm not going to tell you anything that's not very well researched and validated. Sensitivity is a susceptibility factor. This is really important. Originally, we just thought highly sensitive people were more vulnerable. And if you're here live, you could maybe throw in the chat, do you feel more vulnerable? Because you probably think of yourself, if you're highly sensitive, as more vulnerable than other people. More impacted by things like the way I was, crying literally while Jim was doing his intro. And again, while I was reading my blog, even though I wrote it a couple of years ago and I've, read it many, many times, it does feel vulnerable to have stronger feelings, right? But it turns out, this is the beautiful thing about this, that positive things have a greater impact on highly sensitive people than negative. So I'm sure we'll have some questions about that. And in fact, sensitivity is often an advantage, as Jim was alluding to. It is a genetic variation, so you're likely to find more than one highly sensitive person in a family. And I am married to a highly sensitive person. I'm raising a highly sensitive young adult, and both of my parents are highly sensitive. Oy, you can imagine family meals at the holidays. Early research looking at children's temperament found that 40% of children were easy and called, such an easy baby. 15% were slow to warm up. Most of those were probably highly sensitive, and 10% were difficult. And some of those were highly sensitive as well. I was both slow to warm up and difficult. Never easy. I love the research on animals. I'm just trying to give you lots of evidence to convince you that's real. And then you can find this research, come back to this video and look into this and find the facts that you need to convince people in your life that this is real and you're not crazy. Because mostly, I think, even my highly sensitive parents raised me thinking there was something seriously wrong with me because of my high sensitivity. So I'll just mention briefly these three studies. The pumpkin seed sunfish, they're studied at Cornell in a pond, and they did some experiments on them where they would put a twig in the pond in their normal path, and about 75 to 80% of the fish just swam right by it and didn't even notice. And about 15 to 20% of the fish paused and said, they didn't go past the twig right away. And they called those fish timid. And they called the fish that kept swimming bold. I have to pause there because such a negative connotation to stopping and thinking. And, you're all stopping and thinking, or you would not be here. You would not be watching this video. So then they put a trap in the pond, and 80% of the fish, 80 to 85%, I said 75%, 80 to 85% of the fish swam into the trap and got trapped. And that same 15 to 20%, they have markers on them, paused and didn't go into the trap. So now we might call them careful or perceptive or wise rather than timid, right? Let's look at the bottom left-hand corner, the fruit flies. Gotta love the fruit flies. It's kind of a gross picture to me, but the flies, they literally did research on the brains of flies. It's amazing. And in the presence of food, about 80 to 85% of the fruit flies buzzed around like they do, just really getting excited about the food, and became more increasingly active. And 15 to 20% of them paused. They sat. And when they looked at those fish and those flies that were the pausers, you know what they found? More neural complexity. Now, I'm not saying that highly sensitive people are smarter. It's just not true. There's no correlation to IQ, but we are noticers. Finally, the rhesus macaque monkeys. Scientists, behavioral and psychological scientists, love to study the rhesus macaque because their brains function most similarly to the humans. And in this research, if we have time later, I'll get into it in a little more detail. But in this research, they found that the more uptight baby monkeys, have you been called uptight? I think I was this morning. So the uptight baby monkeys really floundered when they were raised by parents who weren't attentive to them. And when they were given to skilled parents, skilled mothers in the monkeys, they flourished. They became the leaders of the herd hierarchy, and they were healthier. When they were put into an enclosure, these monkeys live in 6 acres, and some work had to be done in their enclosure. And when they were brought inside to a much smaller space, the highly sensitive monkeys started to get ill and have more injuries and really did not flourish. And so a poor environment had a negative impact on the uptight monkeys. And but when they were out in the perfect environment, they actually were healthier and had fewer injuries. It's quite amazing. So one of the 9 temperaments discussed and researched by Chess and Thomas is we're all born with 9 temperaments. That's another way that highly sensitive people are diverse. One of the 9 temperaments is sensitivity to environment. And they were first talking about that in 1965. And I don't have a slide in here on Carl Jung, but he was first speaking about high sensitivity 100 years ago. So this has been around for a very long time. It's just that in more modern times, the term highly sensitive people and sensory processing sensitivity has been researched specifically by Drs. Elaine and Art Aaron. Elaine Aaron is my friend and mentor, and she brought me into this work a little over a decade ago. But of course, I was working with highly sensitive families and highly sensitive people my entire life. I just didn't know the term. And they have spearheaded thousands of studies on this so that we are really getting to know more and more and more. And I wanted to just share with you some of the things that they have done that have really changed the world for highly sensitive people. And one of them is this acronym. This is not in the old version of the highly sensitive person because Elaine developed it later. It's in the highly sensitive child and the new edition of the highly sensitive person, DOES. And that stands for the 4 characteristics that identify highly sensitive people. So I want to go over these and take a screenshot if you like. This is a really helpful in trying to talk about high sensitivity. So here they are. We're going to go over them one by one. Depth of processing. We just process things more deeply. Literally, our brains are more active in thinking and processing. Now, is there a dark side to this? Well, there can be. Perfectionism, anyone? Deep processing and lots of thinking can lead us into the perfectionism trap. And it's something that you definitely have to work on if you're highly sensitive. But also, it makes you come to a humanity rising. It makes you think about the things in the world really carefully. And it makes you want to do more and change the world. It's a beautiful thing. So it's discovered, or let me say, it's delineated better in this study. I really like this representation of it. 2 strategies in over 100 species. In fact, we think that these 2 strategies, or sensory processing sensitivity, exists in all species, not just mammals, as you saw. So the first strategy is do it right and do it once. You can see how that might lead you to the perfectionism problem, but you're responsive, reflective, reactive, and sensitive if you have this strategy. It's what's wrong with that? It's all positive, my friends. The second strategy is go for it. If wrong, go for it again. There's nothing wrong with that strategy either. We need about 75 to 80% of humans in the world to go out and do the doing and to get it done. And it doesn't mean that highly sensitive people aren't also doing it, but we do need a lot more of those people because they're the ones who are going to go and start wars. And we'll lose many of them. In fact, let me just take a moment right now to tell you about a study of soldiers. It turns out that soldiers who are highly sensitive, they have a much harder time. I'll tell you why in a moment, but with being overwhelmed and having such strong feelings, soldiers that are highly sensitive are more effective. They do a better job and they survive more. Let me grab a glass of water real quick. So it's quite amazing that if a soldier can survive, Well, you could think of many other jobs where it might be hard to be highly sensitive, but if it was a highly sensitive person in that position, they would do it so beautifully and so thoughtfully. Teachers, doctors, leaders, presidents. This is related to this, and I love that. I always put this picture in all my presentations because my dad's a Texas Hold'em player. And in this study, it was found that highly sensitive people made better gambling decisions. They were more responsive to opportunities and risks because they were processing deeply. O is the dark side of high sensitivity. When you see these words, overstimulated and over-aroused, we might also add the O, overwhelmed. What does it bring up for you? Just take a moment and close your eyes and think of the last time that you felt one of these O's. If you're here live and you'd like to put it in the chat, or you'd like to put it in the comments, wherever you're seeing this recording, we'd love to hear what that looks like for you. Now, it is the one negative aspect of being highly sensitive or having sensory processing sensitivity, having your brain function that way. It's very difficult to be thinking so much. And also the other two, which are having strong emotions and sensing all the subtleties of the world. It's very challenging. I love this image. My brain has too many tabs open. I mean, friends, just looking at email is over-arousing to me. So what is over-arousal? It's when you start to have that tight feeling in your body. It actually has physiological symptoms, and it's sort of on the scale of stress to up to anxiety and panic. Somewhere in there, you start to notice, if you're paying attention, that you're not feeling, you haven't been doing your breathing, right? You're not feeling your best self. And we'll talk a little bit more about that if there's some questions about over-arousal. I also grabbed this picture because this is sometimes how my brain and body feel when I'm over-aroused or overwhelmed by the world. The number one best intervention for dealing with over-arousal and for preventing it, close your eyes. I had to grab this picture of 3 of my herd mates and with their standing and resting with their eyes closed in the middle of a session or a workshop. Close your eyes right now and just keep them closed. I won't change the slides. Keep them closed while I'm talking. The reason that closing your eyes is the number one best intervention, it shuts out 80% of stimulation coming in. 80% gone. It's amazing. And it's so easy. So I'll give you some homework. Still keep your eyes closed. I'll give you some homework, which is that the next time you pick up a key, a house key or a car key or whatever kind of key, close your eyes and count to 10, just 10 seconds. It can make all the difference in the world. Of course, lately I've been noticing anytime I take a mouth breath or anytime I'm feeling a little bit stressed or I haven't paid attention to my breathing in the last hour or so, I pause and do my breathing. And if I close my eyes, it's worth triple. It's worth its weight in gold. Okay, you can open eyes now if you want. And but these slides are not that interesting. If you'd like to just if you're feeling overwhelmed and you'd like to just keep your eyes closed, I support that. So E is emotional reactivity and empathy. Now, sometimes we say emotional responsiveness, but the functional MRI studies actually do show that we have strong emotional reactions and greater empathy. And the empathy is what brings you here and what makes you need and want to change the world. I'll just show you a couple of little stats here, but mostly this is the most important piece to me. We have faster and more strong responses to both positive and negative images, but stronger for positive. And that's huge, my friends. Now, I bet that I will hear from you that you feel like your responses to negative images and negative events in the world and negativity in general is stronger. It's not. It's just that the human brain has a bias to pay more attention to negative because it motivates us to change. And also you might have a habit of paying more attention to the negative, but your brain, if you're highly sensitive, if you have this trait, your brain does not want you to do that. I put this picture in for empathy. This is a little client working with a horse. And empathy means that we have a stronger, open-hearted connection to others. We are pulled to others and causes, especially those more vulnerable. As we're looking at a child here, I do want to say that we cannot expect highly sensitive children to have more empathy toward their siblings or their classmates, because having siblings in the home or going to school is very overstimulating in and of itself. So we won't see their empathy there, but we will see them making great connections with animals or younger, vulnerable children as well. And also, I recently had a question about my child. My 7-year-old is very, very worried about homeless people in our community. And that's another place that we might see the empathy. As sensitive to subtle stimuli, we notice everything. It's just so amazing how much we notice. And I put this one in. This is touch. This horse is mostly asleep, but even when horses sleep, they're still scanning their environment with their ears. And I asked this man to stop when the horse noticed that he was reaching out to touch him. And that was the spot. And, we did this work because his granddaughter is highly sensitive, and the whole family is struggling to honor her and support her. And so this is a lesson that you might teach others. When do you feel comfortable with the proximity of another person? You notice everything: touch, smell, sight. Every sense is more sensitive. I just threw these little pictures in here. They're from my talk at Google, Understanding the Highly Sensitive Person. These are all pictures of me with my animals. Remember, I'm an introvert HSP, so this was my happy spot. And I always had lots of animals around me, and I had the great blessing to grow up very much in the country and with animals. Okay, how do you know for sure if you're highly sensitive? If those 4 didn't convince you, you can take the highly sensitive person self-test. And there's also one on Elaine Aron's website, hsperson.com, for the highly sensitive child. If you go to my website, I have a couple of little videos. If you're not into checking off, you can check which items apply to you, and it will give you your results on hsperson.com. If you see any other self-test anywhere else, it is not validated by the research. This is, and it's copyrighted. And the bad news is that this test is not as fabulous at recognizing extroverts or high sensation seekers, which is another trait that is that shows up concurrently. Whether you're highly sensitive or not, about 15 to 20% of people have this trait of seeking higher sensation. That's me. That's why I was able to, go to France and have a YouTube channel that helps me. So high sensation seekers and sometimes male identified people do not identify as strongly with the HSP scale. Like I said, new ones are coming. A new scale is being researched. It should be out soon, and it will be even better. The newer research, the scientists can assess degree of sensitivity. There's 3 distinct groups, and there's a new older child and teen self-test. I don't find that to be that test to be so accurate for some older, tweens and teens. One of the things I do, if you want to assess your child or a teen or tween, is to ask them to take the child test thinking about themselves as a child. And that's something I also recommend for male identified people. Take the child test thinking about yourself as a child, and then also to take the adult. Some will apply to each, but if you resonate strongly with even just a few, you may very well have this trait. And there's no reason not to identify yourself as having the trait. Okay, all that sensing subtle stimuli, we actually have more brain activation and making fine visual distinctions. And we have all these different areas of our brain that work. That's why when you're too long on the screen or you're out in the world trying to change it, that your brain gets tired. And that's why the 80% stimulation being shut out by closing your eyes is so important. Okay, one more study. This is such an important one for Humanity Rising because we're a diverse crowd. And I made this picture bigger because the words are not so important, but I want you to look at these pictures. These are 2 different ways of thinking and problem solving in the world. Relative is how long the line inside the box is relative to the size of the box. And absolute is the little line inside the box is exactly the same. So you see the top 4 boxes, those are the ones where they match under relative or absolute, and the ones on the bottom are mismatched. So what this study showed was that they were looking at Asians in Eastern Asian populations and Americans of European descent. 2 populations who one is much stronger, uses their brain in relative tests, and the other one uses absolute tests. What's important here is that when someone is low in sensitivity, you can see the vast difference between where they are in relative and absolute, how their brains work, how much they match. They do not match at all. They're not like each other at all. And when you take highly sensitive people of these 2 very different cultures and very different ways of thinking and problem solving in the world, the highly sensitive ones have almost no difference. I'm going to just go to the next slide on the absolute task. Again, low sensitivity, they are completely different in how their brains work. High sensitivity, this is why we are so good at empathy and understanding of the world, especially parts of the world that are different. The highly sensitive person 5 to thrive. This is the topic. How do we take care of our sensitive brains in this suffering world? Because I know that we're all people who want to change the world. We want to make it better. And, in the documentary, Sensitive, the Untold Story, it's about the trait and the science, and Elaine Aron, she talks about, how she was so heartbroken about a cause. I think it was climate change, and how she wanted to be out and protesting. And me too. I want to be on the front lines with my fist in the air and throwing things at the cops. Excuse me. Peace officers. I apologize, but I am anti-authoritarian. And yet, as a highly sensitive person, I have to do that in small bites. And I have to change the world in ways that are compatible with my brain and my trait. And I don't love it. I don't want to be like that. And probably many of us would like to be different. So we have to learn to thrive so that we can embrace our brains, because they are what they are. So the first thing that a highly sensitive person needs is to believe the trait is real. I hope that I've done a good job of convincing you today. If I haven't, please reach out to me. Go to my website, elainefriend.com, and read about it and fill out the contact form and reach out to me. I make videos on YouTube answering people's questions. So I'm happy to make one if you have a question and we don't get to it today. We also need to reframe the past in light of the trait. I think I have these on individual slides, so I'm going to go that way. We need to reframe the past in light of the trait and reframe our childhood. So if you look back, I already told you I was told I was wrong my whole life. And now that I know that my brain literally works differently, I feel so much better. I'm like, oh, I wasn't a freak. I mean, I am, but I wasn't wrong. I was just in situations that weren't right for me. So why can I function pretty well and be out here in the world teaching and being public and trying to save the world in my own little way? It's because there were some good things in my childhood. Like I said, I grew up in the country with animals. I had a lot of chores and I was taught to work hard. And I had all that empathy and there was a place for it. I wasn't shamed for it all the time, just part of the time. But when I look back and think, was it wrong that my best friend was a horse? No, actually, it made really good sense for my sensitive brain. So look back through your past and reframe it in light of the fact that you're highly sensitive, if you are, or maybe it's your partner or your child that brings you here today. We need to heal from past trauma. Trauma impacts highly sensitive people more than the people who do not have this trait, a lot more. Little t traumas, things that, not car wrecks and war and shootings and all the horrible violence that you read about or experience in the world, those will traumatize anybody. But little traumas also traumatize highly sensitive people, especially in their childhood. Healing from trauma is no small thing. And I strongly recommend professional help. If you are still being activated by the traumas, and if you're highly sensitive, I promise you that you do have trauma in your past. I've never met a single one. I am talking about clinical experience here, but even going to public school in the US is traumatic for many highly sensitive children. And maybe you think, oh, I'm so privileged and entitled that traumatized me, or that was so hard for me. No, please don't think that way. It actually was because your brain was so tuned in and so sensitive that it was traumatic for you, and you need to heal it. And that is probably one of the top keys to what you need to do for your brain in order to go out and help heal the world. First, you must heal yourself. Another really important one is to be in community, to know other highly sensitive people. This is resilience research. It's proven over and over again that if you are in some way different or unique in your world, if you know others like you, then you will be more resilient. So find those highly sensitive people in the world. In fact, if you're here live or you're watching the recording and you are highly sensitive and you don't mind telling us, please tell us, because you know what? Then we'll know more people. Just having you all here is worth so much to me in my life. Even though my whole family's highly sensitive, I need to know others, ones that aren't provoking me. And finally, this is number one. Design a life that is compatible. I always end with this one because it's something that you have control over. You have the power, my friends, to design a life that's compatible with your sensitive brain. Now, this is the conversation. Let's get into this a little bit. Let me see what I have here next. Oh, I always love to throw in this quote. Joan Chittister is a Catholic nun who's also a Zen practitioner. And this beautiful quote goes with this leaf that I found in my driveway at the beginning of the pandemic. And it's heart-shaped, and it's damaged, it's bruised and scarred, and yet it is so beautiful. And my friends, hope is not a matter of waiting for things outside of us to get better. It's about getting better inside about what is going on outside. So with that, I will pause the slideshow and invite questions and conversation, because I bet there's a lot. You can ask anything. Just chat it to Jim. Oh, Jim, you're muted.
That was beautiful, Elaine. Thank you so much. You've clearly covered some very wide areas in terms of discerning the characteristics of the highly sensitive people. There's been a number of questions, but let me start out just to make sure that I understand what you were saying, particularly with the ethnicities, that essentially, if I understood it correctly, that highly sensitive, say, Asians and Americans are essentially the same, even
Their
though
brains work essentially the same.
Yeah. There's wide cultural differences between high context and low context societies, for example, so that there's a universality around highly sensitive people.
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Our brains function because of that strong empathy and deep processing. We can overcome cultural difference more easily. And the statistics on that study are huge. I mean, that's, for lines to be that far apart and then practically touching on the other end, that's a huge statistical significance. So we are the people who can bridge all those gaps.
Gotcha. So that one of the reasons why there's so much ethnic conflict, for example, is that it's being perpetuated by low sensitive people. In other words,
be careful, Jim. Be careful.
Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm not going to say it that way.
Yeah.
I am, but that's not what I want to. That's not how I want to say it, because people who do not have this trait can be very sensitive and kind and loving people. Right? It doesn't mean that they're not sensitive. There is a small percentage at the bottom, 10 to 15% who are truly low sensitivity. And they are, more sort of the sociopaths, right? And people who hopefully we don't encounter. But what I'm saying is that the people who do not have this trait, just they have to struggle really hard. I mean, probably most of us in this community have done some pretty serious anti-racism training, especially the white people. And, for people who are highly sensitive, they're going to be profoundly emotionally impacted by their anti-racism training and experiences. But they're going to get it fast. Their heart and mind is going to be changed dramatically. Whereas people who don't have this trait, when they go to that training, they're going to be sort of fighting with it the whole time, that it's going to be so hard for them to understand. I might say also that I'm sort of a chameleon, right? I can go into almost any culture, and I will use my sensing of subtleties and my deep processing to understand as much as I possibly can, as much as that culture might show me, as much, and be able to implement that to communicate well and be in good relationship.
Gotcha. And is there any research that shows that some cultures have a higher percentage of highly sensitive people? Or is it one of these things like you were pointing out with your slides of the fish and the monkeys and the fruit flies? This is just a basic human, actually sentient being characteristic, that about 15 to 20% of any given species is basically highly sensitive.
Basically, yes, 15 to 20% of any, maybe up to 30 of any species has this more complex neural processing. However, there are some cultures in which highly sensitive people are valued. They're not shamed, right? Particularly older, established cultures. You and I live in the US most of the time. This is a very young culture, and it values this country values, colonialism and war and, fighting and conquering and all of those things that, that maybe we don't love as highly sensitive people. But there are cultures, for example, the culture that was in the US before the Europeans came, in indigenous cultures that are still living close to their original, to the land and close to the original, without being so colonized that they can still hold on to the old teachings. Those cultures value highly sensitive people, right? That's the shaman. And you know what the shaman or the medicine woman or whomever, the advisor, the priestly advisor in indigenous cultures, what they did, and even, it doesn't matter the ethnicity of the person, all older cultures, they recognize the space for that. And so they get to live in a hut half a mile from the village on the other side of the river, and people bring them their food and their clothing, and they take care of them. And so these highly sensitive people are nurturing their brains. This is what I want all of us to do. They're finding the space to care for and nurture their brains so that when they are needed to advise the chief or heal the family, they are available. They have all of their resources. And that's what we have to do for our brains in order to continue to function and be activists in a suffering world. We have to resource our brains. And it doesn't matter how you do it. We all have our own techniques.
Yeah. Well, this raises a question that Catherine Alexander posed around the relationship of high sensitivity to an old soul.
Yeah.
And I think that raises an even larger question about the formation of the highly sensitive individual sort of in utero. And if one thinks of, cross-generational trauma, there might be a category of cross-generational sensitivity. What would be your view on sensitivity in the old soul and cross-generational sensitivity?
I would be 100% aligned with that view. There's no research on it. And one of my commitments as an international consultant on high sensitivity is stick to the research. However, I would say anyone that you think is an old soul has probably a 90% chance of being highly sensitive. Same with empaths. Lots of people in this day and age identify as an empath. And that is not the same as having the trait of high sensitivity. All highly sensitive people are not empaths. We have very strong empathy. But probably the vast majority of people who identify as empaths are also highly sensitive. Now, cross-generational trauma. I happen to be living in a lifetime right now with a lot of trauma. And, whatever your spiritual and religious beliefs are, I'm not sure where I came from or why this is the case for me, but as a highly sensitive person, having experienced a lot of trauma in this 58 years, and probably some in utero as well, that I have to wear that. It's a huge part of who I am. And I think, as I was mentioning in the trauma part of my talk, that many of us do. But I have slides on this, and I don't think we need to spend more time on the slides, but there's this very important concept in the science now, and it's called differential susceptibility. All it means is that we have a different level of susceptibility to our environment. So when you make your environment HSP friendly, when you make it good, when you design a life that's compatible with your trait, you will benefit. We literally benefit way more than people who don't have this trait from any positive intervention, whether it's a good diet or exercise or spirituality or breath work or whatever. It doesn't matter. Walks in nature. We will benefit more than people who don't have the trait. And that's the great news. The dark side of that is that we also are more impacted by the negative things that happen. So as a person, as a woman living with a lot of traumas in my life, I have to work extra hard to take care of my brain so that I can function in the world. That's why 30 years of therapy and 35 years of 12-step programs have pretty much helping me a lot.
Yeah. Well, that, Monica Plant is raising an issue around what you just said, and wants you to talk more about the ways through which one can find a way to design one's life that is compatible with one's particular kind of sensitivity.
Okay. That's a good question. So I have this blog on my website about what you need in order to be able to design a life. And I basically said that you have to take it seriously. Now, I expect that at least half of the people who are hearing this talk and participating today, but who hear it in the future, had no idea that this was actually a real thing. I think that the vast majority of us have gone through our lives thinking there was something wrong with us and that we should function just like everybody else. Certainly we were told that, right? When the going gets tough, the tough get going. That's one of the main mantras of my childhood, right? So we have been trying to live like the 80%, and it just is not tenable. You can't do it anymore. And for many people, this requires a huge upheaval of their life. But if you want to be healthy, spiritually and mentally, emotionally, physically, if you want to be healthy enough to be able to take care of others or to help heal the world, you have to shift everything that you're doing in your life. Okay, so I'm going to give you 3 simple things right now that you can do. Do the 5.5 breathing for 1 to 5 minutes before every time you eat. Even if you snack 10 times a day like me, just pause. You have a minute and close your eyes while you're doing it. You will experience a profound change in your life. Now, we all know that we should meditate and exercise and eat more protein or whatever the things are that you should do for yourself, drink more water. We all know how to do it. It's just that we are on the hamster wheel trying to keep up with the 80% world. It was not designed for you. You're not wrong. The world is wrong for you. So change your world. That's all you can do. Okay, so now put your hand in front of your face, everybody, maybe about 5 inches from your face. I'm going to go ahead and do it in front of you. What you can change is between your hand and your face. This is the world out here. When I say design a life, design the world for you, you have no control over this. This is all you can control. But when you do a really good job here, then this out here changes. So here's another one. Let's do brain tapping. I told Jim I definitely want to give some tools today. One of my favorite YouTube channels is called Brain Power Wellness, and I just want to advertise them like everywhere I possibly can. They're for teachers and kids in schools, and they give 1 to 5 minute exercises. So this is a brain power wellness exercise. There's lots of different kinds of tapping. There's emotional freedom technique. There's therapeutic tapping. For highly sensitive people, we need to find what works for us, but this one works for me. So all you're going to do is tap your brain. See how I'm doing it in alternate? Go all over your head and just do this for 1 minute. It completely resets your brain. Do a little special focus wherever the vagus nerve is, at the base of your skull and behind your ears and around your ears. I'm going to stop, but keep doing it for as long as you possibly can. Here's another tapping one. Just take your 2 hands and alternately tap the tops of your thighs. This comes from EMDR. You can use your fingertips. You can make a loose fist, or you can use flat hands. This is something you can do in a meeting or at the dinner table, and allow your hamster wheel to stop and to get some separation of the 2 hemispheres of your brain by doing alternate thigh tapping. So if you only feel like you can do little things, just do the little things.
Yeah, and I'm really loving that you're so impressed with the 5.5 breathing, because I agree with you. I find that it's one of the most important things that I'm doing in my personal practice, because of its immediate salutary effect on your body and your psyche and your emotions.
Yeah, I mean, it is amazing. And let me say, for highly sensitive people, that 5.5 seconds might not be exactly right for you. Like, I'm in a smaller body and smaller, probably different size lungs than Jim's. And so find what I have been teaching for highly sensitive people. If 5.5 seconds, it's helpful to have the bell, right? It's really great. But I think what James Nestor intended in this, and all the breathing experts across the world, and if we could go ahead and put that James Nestor book link in the chat, and we'll put it in the comments as well, so you can check it out. If you haven't read it, do it now. Okay. What I think is important about this is that we do it a little slower and a little longer and a little deeper than we normally would. I find it should be a little bit of a challenge, but not a lot. And so what I'd like you to do, if you're highly sensitive, don't be rebellious about the structure. I personally love structure, but a lot of HSPs are like, don't you tell me how to do it. So your job is to breathe only through the nose, and to do it slightly deeper and slightly longer. And this is to me, this is the kicker and the most important piece. I'd love to hear what the most important part of it for you is, Jim. But the most important part for me is to make the inhale and the exhale the same. That really is challenging. It engages my brain. It changes my body, everything. What is the thing about the 5.5 breathing that is most changing best for you? Or what about it?
Well, what I found particularly important was what James Nestor in his book Breath, which along with Elaine, I recommend to everyone. It's the perfect Christmas gift for anybody you know that might be highly sensitive or in any way
everybody
aware, is that it's both ancient, but that the research that's coming out from the scientists is that this particular way of breathing has such a powerfully optimizing effect on all the systems of your body. There's some kind of breathings that just kind of calm you down. There's other kind of breathings that do different things to the body. But what they're finding out about the 5.5 breathing is that it does almost everything you want simultaneously, so that it's optimizing your sympathetic and parasympathetic systems and bringing them into harmony, your brain and your heart, your intellectual acuity, as well as your emotional stability. And it has almost an immediate effect. So if you do it, we do it for 10 breaths. But I find so many people from Chartres have inculcated it into their daily practice and are finding it of a powerful benefit. And I would say one other point, Elaine, that for me is important about the breathing, and that is that all the data is showing that people are increasingly stressed. and this is actually something I'd like for you to comment on, whether you're in China, Bolivia, South Africa, or Sweden, the data is showing that coming through the pandemic, all of us now being caught up in accelerating climate change and climate disasters, we're getting stressed out. So anxieties, depressions, suicides, road rage, addictions, violence of all kind, domestic violence, are all escalating around the world. Yes. So we all need, and this is the important, I think, of what you're bringing to our attention, those of us who are sensitive to all this, we need a compensatory practice that allows us to become ever more calm internally while the world is becoming ever more turbulent externally. And this 5.5 breathing, I think, for me anyway, and I think for James Nestor and many people around the world, is the optimal short-term way to do that without any side effects. There's no pills. You don't have to travel anywhere.
There's no negative aspect. Yeah, absolutely. Well, you're bringing up something I didn't address that I really want to, so thank you, which is what's good for highly sensitive people is good for everybody. So it's the lifeblood for a highly sensitive person, this kind of self-care and being in your body in a way that is honoring your sensitivity. It's not optional. It's not easy, but it's not optional. And at the same time, it's good for everybody. We call it emotional leadership. Like if you didn't shed a tear over some of the horrible tragedies you've seen in the world, there would be something wrong with you, whether it was a literal tear or not. If those things don't break your heart, then but the fact that it breaks our hearts, that's emotional leadership. And we need to be more public about it. It's my opinion. And like, Jim, you got this dialed. I really appreciate your leadership. Many blessings and much gratitude to you. But all of us need to take a lesson from the page of Jim Garrison and be more public about our broken hearts. But again, we can only do that if we're working on the healing at home. Let me give one more little technique, and then I would like to address, if that's okay.
Sure.
So here's a technique. I cannot demonstrate it because I won't be on camera, but I'd like everybody to try this today. If you will lay on the floor or on your bed next to a wall or the headboard, lay on your back and bring your tush, your bottom, as close to the wall as you possibly can, and then put your legs up on the wall. Now, for some of us, that might just be a 45-degree angle. That's okay. And for some of you yoginis out there, you might be doing a headstand. That's fine too. Maybe it's a little bit more than what an HSP needs. But this is an inversion. You can put a little cushion under your hips if you want more. But if you lay on your back with your legs up against the wall for 3 minutes with your eyes closed, it will change your life. It's equal to a 30-minute nap. And all I'm asking for you is 3 minutes. And when I was seeing clients in the office before the pandemic, I did this between every client. It recirculates all of the blood in your body. It resets your entire circulatory system. And now I've added the breathing to it. And so I think it's just one more little thing. I'm just asking you to do little things. Of course, if you could go on retreat and do a total reset, it would be good.
So Elaine, let me make sure I understand. So you're saying you lie on your back against the wall.
Yes.
Then you elevate your hips as high as you can.
You don't have to. It's good just to have them on the ground. If it's
but
uncomfortable for you, you can elevate them
and put your legs up against the wall.
You scoot up to the wall sideways. You sit down next to the wall, and then you scoot as close as you can get sideways, and then you swing your legs up. And if you have some physical issues, you might need someone to help you bring your legs up. I lift my dad's legs up for him when I can convince him to do that. And then you just lay there with your eyes closed for 3 minutes. Try it. Let me know. Send me an email. Go on my website, fill out the contact form. Please tell me what you think. And you know what? I don't think I have a video. I'll make a video of this today. Me doing this and put it on my YouTube channel. Okay.
Really? And then I'll send me the link and I'll put it on HR tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okay. Question in the chat. about attention deficit disorder and attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, and addressing also the stress. We have increasing numbers of people diagnosed with illnesses, mental illnesses. It's a pandemic, but more epidemic in Western cultures. I do believe, as someone said in the chat, that the vast majority of, that's an over-exaggeration. And this is just me speaking clinically. There's not research on this yet. But clinically, I have found that at least half of people diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, or ADHD, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, are actually highly sensitive people. Mm-hmm. And you may have the characteristics of ADD, which is not even officially a diagnosis anymore, or ADHD. You may have characteristics of that, but if you're highly sensitive, you don't actually have it. And here's the really important piece of this. The treatment for true ADHD is stimulant drugs. Like if caffeine calms you down, then you might actually have ADHD. But stimulants for highly sensitive people are toxic. We're overstimulated. We're overstressed. And we're living in a world that gives no space for coming down. That's why we have to take charge of it ourselves and put our oxygen masks on. So that's the important part about ADHD and ADD. And in terms of anxiety, my friends, anxiety becomes a habit. High stress becomes a habit. If you're living with chronic overarousal, then of course you're going to have anxiety and possibly depression as well. Highly sensitive people who live in a bad environment, who aren't designing a life or had a rough childhood, are more inclined to have anxiety or depression as a diagnosis. It's true. So let me give you this example. This is my window of optimal level of arousal. Right? It varies depending on, maybe it's a little low right now because I'm stressed out because I'm on screen, right? Even though I'm enjoying this, it narrows my level of arousal. You can be under aroused, bored, lonely, getting into depression. You can be over aroused, stressed out, anxious, even up to panic. But what you want to do is to find where you are just in your best body and your best mind and your best heart. Where's your best self? Now, if you're living with chronic overarousal, your window of optimal has gotten so narrow you can barely see through it. Mm-hmm. So all these little techniques are opening up your optimal level of arousal. And when you open it up, then you're going to be able to do so much more in the world.
Yeah. Another question, Elaine, from Lloyd is as to the difference that you understand between high sensitivity and being an empath. Is empath sort of a subset of being highly sensitive, or are they separate categories that sometimes overlap?
They're separate categories that overlap. So there are people out there who are really writing and talking a lot about empaths. And sometimes they say that they're highly sensitive people, or that it's the same as being highly sensitive. There are certainly overlaps. And as I said, I think most empaths probably have this trait. I don't understand actually how a person could be an empath without having the trait, but there isn't scientific evidence around empaths. And so we can't say yes or no on this question. There just isn't the research. It's coming. But right now, if you look up on the internet, the definition of empath, it mentions science fiction. So we have to cross that bridge from Star Trek or from Deanna Troi to the science. And I just appreciate all of you who got my reference there. And so we can't say absolutely. Highly sensitive people have very strong empathy. They are not all empaths. And a lot of folks who think they're empaths probably are, but they're actually highly sensitive people with strong empathy who have not done a good job of setting up the boundaries in their brain to take care of themselves. Like if you feel like you're a sponge and you just soak in everybody's thoughts and feelings, you have the power. You don't have to do that, but it takes work.
Yeah. Well, let's talk for a moment about the relationship between the interior realm of a highly sensitive person and dealing with an increasingly turbulent world out there.
Yeah.
Because the very things that create the over arousal are now increasingly the norm. And yet, as you're saying, that, you know, what goes on from your hand to you is the only thing that you can control. So speak to us a bit about the relationship between the inner and the outer for a highly sensitive person. And I'm asking this in some ways, Elaine, because we need to design our lives for sure to optimize our personal capacities and proclivities and so forth. But the external world beyond what we're designing is impinging on people with greater and greater force in a more and more unpredictable way, so that we're in a world in which the external stimuli are kind of negative triggers for a highly sensitive person.
Right. Well, you know, I don't know what you think, Jim, but I think that we are, you know, imploding in a certain way as a planet. And, you know, like, yes, obviously around climate change and all that stuff, but also just in terms of how reactionary the world is and how much it's escalating so rapidly right now. And I feel like I know you were alive at this time, and some people were, but growing up in the US, there was a lot of talk about the potential of nuclear war. And we, you know, that you should have that. Could you go somewhere? Would there be a bomb shelter that you could go to? Where would you hole up? And I read a ton, speaking of science fiction and science fantasy, that's my favorite genre. And I read lots and lots and lots of it, especially as a young person. And, you know, there would be these kids who would, you know, these people, these families who would go find some deep underground cavern, and they would go live there for a generation or two or three. And then they would come out, and they would be the ones who were wise and who had survived. And it's sort of who the highly sensitive people are. And that's why I put such a strong emphasis on taking care of yourself on this, because this is going to continue. I feel, I'm no future soothsayer, but I feel that the outside world is going to continue to get worse for quite a while. And somebody just put, we do create the future. And I know, and I'm sorry I'm saying that out loud, but in the interest of discourse, I think that I see it increasing. And what's really important to me is that the highly sensitive people don't fall off into chronic overwhelm, depression, anxiety, because the world needs us now more than ever. And I think, you know, one of my personal heroes is Harvey Milk. Harvey Milk was the first openly gay elected public official in this country, and he was actually in San Francisco. And his message to all gay people in the world was that they should come out. They should talk about who they are, and then it would be impossible for there to be anyone in the world who didn't know a gay person. And that's true of the world changers. We have to really come out and speak out. But I just want to honor and acknowledge that the more there is, the harder it is. You know, when Banafsheh starts talking about, you know, on Humanity Rising, when she's talking about what's going on in Iran, I just, you know, I'm just so broken by it that I become debilitated. I have to turn it off. I can't even, you know, but if I have taken really good care of myself, then I come in with my, you know, my armor on, not bad armor, like the kind that you need to wear. You know, it's like going out, the emperor who had no clothes. You know, I come in dressed with my arousal level pretty steady. Then I can open my heart up and hear it and be a part of it. And then let me just say this, highly sensitive people, we have to think about how can we impact and implement and create change. You might not be able to be on the front line throwing rocks at the people shooting tear gas at you. That might not be you, but you could write a blog. You could talk to everyone you know. You could say, hey, that news station is completely biased. Could we at least watch something slightly neutral? You can do little things. I happen to be in Oklahoma right now, so everywhere I go, it has the kind of news on that just, to me, sounds like gobbledygook. I just can't even believe people watch it. And I mean, I know in this community, we all probably know what that is, but we have to be so clear that we are taking care of ourselves so that we can make change. And listen, there's nothing wrong. I was going to be the first female president of the United States. That was my entire life goal. And then I worked on a lot of political campaigns, and my mentor said, Elaine, law school is the wrong place for you, because you have to think inside the box when you go to law school. You think outside the box. And that's the quintessential highly sensitive person, that deep processing. There are no boxes in our brains. So we have to find a different path. And to this day, I have grief over the fact that I'm not president. I know I couldn't really have done it because I would have just been so overwhelmed all the time. But I'm committed to making the changes that I can make in the world, things that resonate with me. You know, in psychology, we talk about ego syntonic and ego dystonic. What is ego syntonic is something that your ego likes and can work with. Ego dystonic is something that just feels wrong in your gut. And HSPs, your gut is always right. It's always right. Never make a mistake. I know it's time is ticking, and soon we'll be ending. And I just want to take a moment and say that if you're on social media, I would really appreciate if you came and followed me and checked me out and share my content, because my mission is to reach between 1.7 and 2 billion highly sensitive people across the world. And most people who are highly sensitive are doing fine. But the vast majority of them have no idea that they have a trait and that their lives could be so much better, and they could be changing the world even more if they were thriving. And so please help me by getting my message out. And it's just, I'm pretty much either Are You Highly Sensitive or my name on all social media platforms.
Elaine, thank you so much. I just want to have you make a final comment after a splendid program, and that is to talk just for a moment to all of us about the relationship between being highly sensitive and nature. Because I noted, and I was very moved actually by all your pictures of your horses and so forth and so on. And I would imagine that one of the things that highly sensitive people should be doing on a regular basis is just simply being out in nature. Would you agree with that, or would anything you would
absolutely
like to say to add to that?
Absolutely, it's true. And, you know, I want to honor people who, you know, live in an apartment in a major city and have a really hard time even getting outdoors. During COVID, you know, people couldn't even leave their tiny apartments. And in eco-psychology, we know that actually just holding a rock or a feather or a plant or even looking outside the window has an impact on the brain. So remember how I said what's good for highly sensitive people is good for all people. So nature there's tons of research on this. I can say unequivocally, yes, nature improves everything for us. It's where we as humans are meant to be. It's where all animals are meant to be. We evolved to be on the earth. So, you know, whatever that might look like, whether it's taking a walk down your neighborhood or forest bathing or going on retreat in the desert, whatever you can do, or maybe just looking at the tree outside your window and really seeing it, giving it a really mindful look. I have an exercise just to answer your question called green leaves, Jim. And green leaves comes from Pema Chodron. And she's one of my spiritual teachers. And she talks about just walking or driving or wherever you're outdoors, just looking at the leaves on the trees and seeing what color they are. How often do we do that? We can all look at Jim's background right now. But the next time that you have an opportunity to look outside, look, see it. Allow yourself to soak in the beauty of it and the life. I think that's part of why nature is so important to us, because it's life. And we are living, all caps, highly sensitive people. So being in nature is the number one thing you can do. So just increase your time in nature by 5 minutes. It'll change you.
Elaine, you're fabulous. Wonderful to spend time with you today. and realize just how sensitive we all are.
Yeah.
And what I'm struck by is that the fruit flies and the little fishes and the other species have highly sensitive fruit flies and fish and
Yeah.
monkeys, and just like us. So it's profoundly comforting to know that we're so deeply embedded in the larger ecology, and you've really brought that alive. And I hope that everyone will take note of that. We're working with Elaine to do a course for Ubiquity sometime over the next several months, and we'll bring that to your attention when it crystallizes. And that'll do it for us for today, everyone. We have a session tomorrow, which is on a slightly different take. It's on the quantum field and the research that is being done on the brain, that we use about 5% of our brain most of the time, and how we can just increase how we actually use our own brain for a more effective and abundant life. And I would imagine, Elaine, that most of the people that would be engaging in doing something like that would be highly sensitive.
Exactly. That's why I wanted to be here. So thank you so much for this opportunity, Jim.
All right. Well, listen, you're all welcome to join the after session chat that Stan put the link in the chat box where you can have an ongoing conversation in a more informal environment. And we'll see everybody tomorrow, same time, same station here on Humanity Rising. Thank you, Elaine. Splendid session.
Thank you so much.
Bye for now, everyone.